Yo, what's up? Today I'm going to be talking about the racism in European soccer. And when I'm talking about European soccer, I'm talking about the leagues in Europe, such as the soccer leagues in Europe, such as the Premier League, La Liga, Bundesliga, the Italian leagues, and there's several leagues in Europe, but there's several soccer leagues in Europe, but there's also the French league also. But the two most prominent leagues, soccer leagues in Europe, are the Premier League, which is stationed out in England, and there's the Premier League. And there's La Liga, which is stationed out in Spain. So Premier League in England and La Liga in Spain, two of the main soccer leagues in Europe. And a lot of these soccer leagues in Europe are racist. And let me tell you guys, like the type of racism that these European soccer leagues have. Okay, in European soccer, there's a plethora of black players in European soccer. Right? Some of these black players come from Africa directly. Some of these black parents, some of these black players, parents come from Africa, and some of these black players are just from Europe or grew up in Europe. And a lot of these black players, like you'll never see any of these black players in these European leagues, such as the Premier League of soccer in Europe. You'll never see. You only see black players in those leagues playing at certain positions. They mainly have black players playing a defensive role in soccer. You mostly see black players playing a defensive role in soccer, being a defender. Or sometimes they have a black player. If they do want to put a black player in the midfield, they won't put him as a center midfielder. The center midfielder, the number 10, that's a playmaker. That's a person who create scoring opportunities. They pass the ball to the striker, and the striker scores, and sometimes the center playmaker scores himself. And the number 10 role, the center playmaker role, that's like one of the most important positions on the field, if not the most important position. And you have the striker, which is the one who score score goals most of the time. Strikers score goals. That's what they do. They score. And both the center midfield, number 10 position, playmaker, and both that position and the striker position, strikers score goals. The playmaker position and the striker position, those are the two quote unquote superstar positions in soccer. In Premier League and La Liga, you will barely see a black playmaker as a number 10, and you will never see at all, barely, a black player starting as striker or a black player as striker at all. Why is this? Is there racism in soccer? Is this due to racism? And I think it is. You have all these African players, black players, who are very talented, fast, athletic, can dribble, can pass. A lot of these African players are all around gifted, and a lot of these African players are black players. It's not only African players, but let me say black players in general, because not all these black players are African. A lot of these black players, soccer players, a lot of these black soccer players in Premier League, when they're on the come up, you know, these black players, a lot of them showed offensive promise. You know, people see the scouting reports on these black players. That's how they get the chance to be in La Liga. With African players specifically, they do scouting reports on these African players to see how they play before they even bring them to the Premier League in a lot of cases. So they see European coaches, European managers, people who scout and watch these African players play. They see that a lot of these African players, a lot of these African soccer players, they have the ability to score, to be a competent striker, and the ability to play make, to pass a ball, set up a scoring chance. They see African players who are on the come up, who eventually get to the Premier League, playing at that number 10 role, playmaking, and succeeding in that role. And they see these young African players having the ability to strike and score goals, strike on goals and stuff. They see these African players doing that when these African players are just young teens. So African players, they have the offensive know-how in soccer at a very young age. So it's not like they want to be natural at these positions in the Premier League, because they are used to playing these positions growing up, a lot of these black players. Well, once they get these young African players, to the Premier League from their African nations, a lot of these African players that grew up, at a young age in Africa, they're playing in the domestic leagues in Africa, and they're playing in offensive roles, and the European scouts, they see this. And a lot of these African players are very offensively talented before they get to the Premier League. And as soon as these African players get to the Premier League, they get accepted on these teams, these African players. They're now on these teams, and these European coaches always find a way to mold these offensively gifted African soccer players that grew up playing the number 10 role, at center midfield, playmaker. And some of these African players grew up playing striker, but once they get on these European teams, these European coaches, they turn these offensively gifted African players into defenders. And that's crazy, right? You see African players that could be offensive prodigies, you know, but as soon as they get to Europe and play soccer, with all that offensive promise that they show, these European coaches, these European managers of these soccer squads in the Premier League and La Liga, they always find a way to turn these African players into defensive players instead of nurturing their offensive talent to potentially be a better center midfielder or a better striker than they were in the African leagues. And that's crazy. Like, you rarely see a black striker or a black number 10 midfielder playmaker in European soccer. Like, you barely see it. Like, you see Africans playing as a defender. You see black players playing as defenders in the Premier League. Or sometimes you see black players such as Sterling, or Sterling, or what's his name? The dude who plays for Senegal. Oh, I forgot his name. This is African player who plays for Senegal, and he plays in the Premier League. I forgot his name. I'm gonna search him. Let me search him. What's his name? Let me see. Let me see. Sorry, guys. Sadio Mane. Yes, that's his name. I can't believe I forgot his name. He's an amazing player. He's from Senegal, and he plays for Sadio Mane is from Senegal, and he plays from the Premier League team Liverpool. So Sadio Mane and Raheem Sterling are both wingers. You know, wingers are just fast players who push the ball forward. You know, they aren't strikers. They aren't. I mean, wingers, they do score goals, but they don't get the same scoring opportunities as a striker, and they don't have the same playmaking responsibilities as a number 10 role. So they'll put black players occasionally as a winger. But the winger isn't the superstar position. You know, it kind of is, but it's not really a superstar position like that. Not compared to like a striker or a center midfield. You know, the biggest names in soccer are either strikers or center midfield playmakers. That's the bread and butter. Those two positions. And wingers, they don't get that same praise as a number 10 playmaker or striker. They just don't. So they'll put black players in the positions. These European coaches will put black players in the positions that get less praise. You know, like the winger or a defender or a defensive midfielder. You know, those positions get less praise. That's why they put Africans in that position. And it's all an agenda. It's all an agenda at the end of the day. if these European coaches in the Premier League, if they started putting black players as the number 10 striker play, I mean, if these European coaches started putting black players as the number 10 center midfield playmaker or as the striker, and these black players start to get successful in those positions, black people could potentially take over the sport of soccer. You know, imagine Sadio Mane, one of the best players in soccer, dominating as a number 10 playmaker. His name would ring higher than Messi. Lionel Messi, he's one of the most famed center midfielders and strikers. He plays those two positions in soccer, and that's an example. Messi he gets so much praise because he plays those two superstar positions. He's a number 10 playmaker, and he's also a striker. And players who play those two positions, the center midfield and the striker, players who play those two positions like Messi, and if they play those two positions very well, they get that superstar recognition. Same thing with Ronaldo. Ronaldo, another one of the top European players. He's a striker. You know, strikers and center midfielders, they get a high level of superstardom and recognition. And if black people start to dominate those two positions in soccer, then the black players they would start to play well in those positions. They dominate the positions, and they'll play well in those two positions as strikers, center midfield. Black players will start to be the ones who are superstars, and that will give black players confidence, and it will just increase their level of play, and black players would eventually take over soccer. You know, if black players start to dominate that number 10 role and that striker role, they'll be all over the media. All these black players who would dominate as a striker and number 10 playmaker, they'll have so much fans, especially if they're on a successful team. Like imagine Sadio Mane as a number 10 playmaker and he's on a successful team in the Premier League. He'll become so famous. He'll probably be on the cover of FIFA at the new FIFA game. It'll be pandemonium. I mean, it'll be crazy. Sadio Mane was a starting number 10 playmaker. He already is playing wonderful at winger. He's already a top player in the world as a winger. And if he used that same talent as a number 10 playmaker, the ability to dribble, past defenders, the ability to pass the ball, create scoring chances, the ability to strike. Sadio Mane, he's a winger, but he has all the skill set to be a world class number 10 playmaker. But Liverpool, the team he's on, they're never going to put Sadio Mane as a number 10 playmaker because he'll take over that position on that Liverpool squad in the Premier League. He'll probably be the best. With his skill set, he'll probably be the best number 10 midfielder in the world. Dribbling past defenders, setting up teammates to score. And the fact that he's a African striker, the fact that he'll be an African playmaker, he'll get a lot of attention for it, and he'll take over that position, and he'll give confidence for other black and African players to play like him and take up the center midfield position. And other teams in the Premier League, they'll see Sadio Mane being successful as a number 10 playmaker. And they'll see that and they'll try to mold their black players to be number 10 playmakers. And there's other teams will start black players at the number 10 playmaker. And that trend of black people being the number 10 playmaker, that would just spread across the league. And they don't want black players, these European coaches, they don't want black players taking over that striker position, taking over that playmaker position, because black people would eventually take over those positions. And if you take over those two positions, then you take over soccer. You know, if black people started to play the number 10 playmaker than striker, these Europeans already know that since those are the two, like one of the most important roles in soccer, and black people take over those roles, those positions, then your biggest superstars are black players. If that happens, if black players eventually excel at number 10 in strikers, black people would eventually become the face of soccer. Black people will become the face of soccer if these black players in the Premier League start to play the number 10 in striker roles. And Europeans, they don't want these European coaches in the Premier League, they don't want African players, black players, to become the face of soccer. Same thing with Alex Iwobi. Alex Iwobi plays winger, and he's on the Alex Iwobi plays winger for this team called Everton. You know, in the Premier League, and Alex Iwobi, he used to be on this team in the Premier League, this other team called Arsenal, and he played winger, and he plays winger in the Premier League on both of those teams he was on. And Alex Iwobi, he's Nigerian, and he also played for the Nigerian international soccer team. But Alex Iwobi, he plays for winger, and it's obvious that winger isn't his natural position. You know, Alex Iwobi plays better as a number 10 playmaker. And when Alex Iwobi does play number 10, he excels. He plays at a high quality than he plays as winger when he plays as the number 10 playmaker. And his team, Arsenal and Everton, I think they've played Alex Iwobi as the number 10 playmaker on a couple of occasions. And every time Alex Iwobi plays as the number 10 center midfield playmaker, he excels. But his teams never put him as a number 10 midfielder officially. They'll play him as a number 10 midfielder once every so games. They'll play Alex Iwobi as a number 10 midfielder once every blue moon. Even though he excels at that position when he plays that position. And they're not gonna his coaches, his European coaches, Alex Iwobi, they're not gonna put him officially as that number 10 playmaker, because they try to hold a lot of these African players, these black players, back. They'll rather put a black player out of position as a winger than put a black player as the position that he plays the best in, and sometimes that's central midfield. So these European coaches would rather put an African player in a role, in a position on the field that he plays worst in, than to put him in a position that these African players excel in. So these European coaches, they'll actually hurt their team by playing the by playing these black players out of position, then to put the black players in the position that they excel in. So these European coaches would rather hurt their team than to see black men like Alex Iwobi, Sadio Mane excel as the number 10 playmaker or as a starting striker. Like, shit is crazy, man. They did the same thing with Michael Obi. You know, Michael Obi, he grew up playing the number 10 playmaker. You know, he excelled as a number 10 playmaker and when he was playing in Africa. And when he moved to Europe, I think in his early days, he was playing as a number 10 striker for a little bit. In his teenage years, when he was playing like under 21 soccer, whatever, with Chelsea or whatever team he was playing with in the Premier League when he was under 21. He was playing center midfield a little bit back then, and he was excelling. Michael Obi from Nigeria, he was excelling in the center midfield position as a teenager playing in like the European leagues. But when he got to the big grown-up league, you know, in the official Chelsea squad in the Premier League, they switched Michael Obi from that center midfield position that he was excelling in to be a mediocre. I mean, he wasn't mediocre, but a kind of average defensive midfielder. So these European coaches would rather hurt their team than to put an African player at his natural position that would excel the squad. You know, an African player playing at his natural number 10 position as a playmaker, that would excel your squad. You know, that'll make your squad better. But they'll rather play an African player out of position where he doesn't play as well, and that's going to hurt the team for obvious reasons, and they'd rather do that. These European coaches, man, they be scheming, man. And I wish I could see in the Premier League and La Liga more black players as the number 10 the number 10 playmaker role and the striker role, you know, scoring goals and shit. Sadio Mane has the ability to be a striker. He can score goals. Man, they better stop playing. And Alex Iwobi, let me get back to Alex Iwobi. Alex Iwobi, like I said earlier, he plays for the Nigerian international soccer squad, you know, for the Nigerian national team, soccer. Alex Iwobi, he starts as number 10 most of the time for Nigeria, and he plays way better in Nigeria for Nigeria than he does in the Premier League. And you want to know why Alex Iwobi plays better for Nigeria than he does in the Premier League? It's because Nigeria doesn't play Alex Iwobi out of position at winger. They play Alex Iwobi at his natural position as a number 10 playmaker, and that's the position that Alex Iwobi excels in. But when he plays the Premier League, even though his coaches, European coaches, see Alex Iwobi excelling as the number 10 in Nigeria, these European coaches still play Alex Iwobi out of position as a winger. Alex Iwobi's not even fast enough. He doesn't have that elite speed to be a winger. But they're still... Oh, wow, man. Shit is just crazy, man. Racism is everywhere, man.